The Last Hope Camp is located on the South Mountain in Annapolis County within the district of Gespagwick. And as is the rest of Mi'kma'ki, it is in the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I will just say a little bit about Nina and Randy as well. I had the pleasure of spending a night with you, Nina, at the camp not too long ago in some extreme weather, and really enjoyed our conversations together. And Randy, I've spoke to you on the phone only, so it's so nice to see you in person. So yeah, I guess I'll just say something about you two in way of introduction, and then we can start our conversation together. So Nina Newington is a gardener, carpenter, writer, forest protector, and a member of Extinction Rebellion. She and her wife live on the North Mountain in the Gespagwick district. And Randy Neily is a seventh generation farmer and forester, hunter, trapper, and wildlife manager who tries to find a balance between wildlife and people. He is working towards solutions for sustainable forest practices that respect ecology and nature. He believes in the importance of teaching children the value of a healthy forest. So I guess, well, first of all, thank you both for joining us. Since early December, you and many others have been putting incredible effort into stopping the small area of forest and wetlands from being logged. There have been rotating groups of campers for over almost 4 months now, and many other day visitors who have been bringing food and morale. So to start with, maybe you could give us a brief history, an overview of how you came to this point of using direct action to protect this particular forest.
Well, thank you for the invite. How this direct action came about was that I went in to visit the camp I have there at Last Hope. I had built this camp back in 1994 to replace the Last Hope camp, which was getting deteriorated very badly. But once I see the ribbons were up and that they were going to cut this small block, this wildlife corridor, I contacted my MLA, Carmen Kerr, to arrange a meeting with the DNR and the forestry rep for that area to see if they would reconsider. And unfortunately, I was told that they weren't going to reconsider. And then I just happened to do a post on Facebook, and Nina actually seen the post and contacted me, and that's how it all began. You want to hear more of the story of the Last Hope camp?
That's fine for now. But maybe Randy, could you just describe the forest, and maybe tell us a bit about what these lands mean to you and your family, or to the wildlife there?
Well, this forest contains a fairly large wetland that flows into the Beals Brook, and basically at one time it was homesteaded at one time, and actually they used to hay the meadow there. And then they used to take that hay and haul it into Roxbury, which is a well-known settlement and to the logging camps that were there. I came about, it was probably in the 70s, went there on a fishing expedition with some friends, and then I got to know the area, more familiar with the area, and got to hike and visit more of some of the spots that that was shown on the map, basically of that area. And it became very dear to my heart So anyway, before I get too emotional about this, I have to keep on speaking. So anyway, in the year 2000, Bowater Mersey owned that property at that time, parts of it, and they decided that they were going to log it. So when they run the new survey line, it happened to go across my veranda, my camp, and so I went into negotiations with Vice President of Bowaters, Jonathan Potter. And anyway, we come to some kind of mutual agreement that I would move the camp onto a piece of private property, which I had permission to move it onto. And I had brought up my concern of the spring that the last Hope camp used to always get their fresh drinking water on, and also the cart road that went into what the Beals Meadows. And so I made suggestions not to put the road to where they actually put it, but to go a little farther north. And they decided that they didn't want to put it farther north. That they had sent their forestry techs in. Anyway, they left a small corridor there that they didn't bother cutting. The forestry techs didn't feel it was really viable because of the large boulders, and it wasn't really high profitable wood that was in that area. It was mostly some oaks and some pines, and a few little wet areas that did have some spruce, but anyway. Yeah, as I became more familiar with the area and got to know some of the area better, but, I hadn't said anything for 20 years. You know what was going on, and basically, you know, you're kind of caught in the position that. And anyway, so finally, when I do this in late November 1st, I decided I'd take a stand that, you know, this planet can't withstand what is taking place here in this province. I mean, if you fly over Southwest Nova, you know, and I had talked to biologists from the wildlife department, and but they only have a small voice, and it seems that the large corporate operators and financial institutions are really benefiting the most. And a lot of our forestry products doesn't even stay in this province. You know, they're shipped overseas. And, you know, a lot of the poor guys that are trying to make a living, you know, that, yeah, they're just being utilized as a tool to put this product to market. And, you know, I have friends that had, you know, they tried it and they had to declare bankruptcy. Yeah. So.
So yeah, the current forestry is not only is very damaging to the, obviously, to the forest and the natural habitat, but it's very expensive for the people trying to make a living from it to do that as well. But I think let's talk a little bit more about that later. I'd love to delve more into what you were saying, I think, about basically like environment versus the economy and like that balance and that issue. I was wondering, Nina, if you could share what inspiration or story is behind your efforts to protect this forest and its inhabitants.
Sure. So I actually was waiting for a friend to come to dinner, and I happened to be looking at comments on Facebook, which I don't even usually bother to look at. And there was a remark from Randy about who I'd never met, saying, "Oh, tried everything, and DNR say it's too late to stop the cut in this forest, and the flagging has gone up." And I also live in Annapolis County. I live about 45 minutes drive or so from Last Hope, and I too, like Randy, although not for as long, have been watching the clear cutting just decimating the forests one after another, and feeling really sick to my stomach and angry and powerless. But trying to work on it, and part of that working has been as part of Extinction Rebellion and some other actions that we've done. But along with that, we've talked to a lot of people. We've leafleted lots of people. We've talked to people at Spider Fairs and Natal Days. I think in all that time, we've only really had 4 people who told us to buzz off, and everybody else talked with varying degrees of grief and anger about how much they hated the clear cutting. So I read Randy's post, and I did a little tiny bit of research, and I messaged him and said, "Can we meet?" And a couple of days later, he drove me and another person up into that area, or maybe we drove separately. Anyway, whatever. We ended up there, and he took us for a walk in the woods and the forest there, and then he talked about the Last Hope moose camp that had been built in the 1920s, right on the site, back when game was getting scarce because of what the settlers had already done to the province. But this was a place that was such good habitat for moose that they could still be found there. And when people wanted to go hunting and fill their winter larders, this was their last hope. It was the place they could go. That was before white-tailed deer had really made their way into the province in a big way. So walking in that forest and thinking about it being cut, and I realized it wasn't a clear cut. They were proposing to take 30%, which if you were doing it in a place where it would be okay to cut, that's not a terrible version of ecological forestry necessarily. It depends how it's done. But this was really clear from talking with Randy that this was a place that shouldn't be cut at all. That this was a little forest, still standing, trees around 80 years old, that had grown back up probably after a fire. But all around were clear cuts, and one right up to the boundary of it, literally done the year before on private land. But wherever you looked, there was hardly a tree standing as tall as the trees in this 24-hectare forest. And the idea that they had to come and take this last bit, that they had to come in and drive extraction roads through and remove what really was not going to be a very valuable harvest, but still had to come and take the last bit, regardless of its effect on the wildlife. There was something about that that just seemed completely unacceptable. And in myself and the other people who wanted to get involved, there was just that feeling of enough is enough. We need to draw a line in the sand, and here we are. This particular patch of sand has presented itself through Randy being willing to stand up and take a stand and talk about it. So in the space of 4 days, we pulled ourselves together, got ourselves geared up, and came in on the 2nd of December and set up camp. And we've been there ever since, through varying degrees of extreme weather.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of people who have offered their support and care to the camp, some camping and some otherwise. But do you have any idea of how many people have helped so far in various ways?
Well, I did a post for International Women's Day, and I used photographs that only showed women. And when I counted how many different women there were in those photographs at camp, there were 54 different women. So I know that those guys, and I know there were more women who weren't in those photographs. So we're up to 80 or 90 people who've been out to the camp. And at various points this winter, that was not a simple enterprise. It's a 4-kilometer or so logging road. People often have a kind of expression at the end of it, like, "Oh, if you had told me what that road was like, I might not have come," which might be why we didn't tell them exactly.
Yeah, people have gone to a lot of effort to get in there. And then I guess there's all the people that haven't actually been out to camp, but are also offering support in different ways too.
Yeah, and that's always important to say, is that camping is only one part of it. We wouldn't be able to do these things, and we wouldn't be able to have any effect if there weren't also all the people who, at the most immediate collegiate level do scheduling and email and connecting, and people who donate money and firewood and other stuff, but also the people who respond when we ask people to write letters, the people who make phone calls. You know, you need to have a wide reach. If there's only a few people camping, the government is very ready to declare us a few really free huggers. I mean, they do declare that anyway, but it's less convincing when you've got letters coming in from all over the province. And I also want to say that one of the huge, wonderful things that has happened has been, and something we've worked on from the start of the camp, has been building better alliances with Mi'kmaq grandmothers, and then specifically with the district chief of the Gisborne, Marilyn Lee Francis, who's originally from the Acadia Band. So that sense of being, you know, it's always difficult to work out how to go in. Who do we ask to set up camp? You know, it's on, quote, Crown land, which is essentially stolen land. But it's not always clear who to talk to. And I put out the word at the beginning, and, you know, we talked to various people, but what happened after probably a month, a little bit over a month, through making some of those contacts, was that we were really formally invited to be on that territory by the district chief. And that's the district chief under a traditional system of governance. It's not the system that was created by the Indian Act in 1876, the bands and councils. This is the Mi'kmaq reaching for a traditional structure. And as part of that, they have a flag that's based on a pictograph that was reproduced in the 1880s. So they presented us with that flag, and we fly it very happily over the camp, and have continued to build those connections and those relationships. And that's hugely important, partly to me, because we're incredibly fortunate that here on this land, we have people who already have a better version of how to be in relationship with nature. We don't have to invent this, we have to listen. You know, there are people who don't act as if we're separate from nature and entitled to take what we want, which is the basis of the whole extraction industry. Instead, there are people who can teach us how to behave respectfully as members of the whole. You know, that these are all our relations. We have kin that are human and kin that are non-human. But I also want to say that Randy, actually, from the very beginning, has been a real example to me of somebody who also thinks in that way. You know, I think there is a core of people who love nature and are connected and have paid attention, where we learn that from the forest as well as from each other.
Yeah, I'm wondering for people who haven't been to the camp, could you, I mean, just hearing you talk about all the people who are working together, and the, you know, permission and gratitude that you've gotten as well from the Mi'kmaq people whose lands these are, and just all the people that have been involved. Could you share an image or story from the camp that kind of gives us a glimpse of what it is like there when there's, you know, people gathered there for this purpose? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, my mind goes to the occasion of the first really big snowstorm, when three of us were there, and Sandra Finney from down Yarmouth Way, and Mel, who's from Briar Island, and me. And Sandra and I were camped out still. This was in early January, in the small tents in the woods that we had been in. Mel was in a old prospector's tent we'd been loaned that actually had a wood stove in it. And I think that night it went down to about -7, and it snowed all night. And Sandra's tent collapsed on her at somewhere around 1 in the morning, so she had to crawl out and sort of shovel it off. We both concluded quite early in the morning that -7 was the outer limit of our gear, and that we had been damned cold. So after that, we spent the next 3 nights, the 3 of us, in a 10 by 12 tent, which was pretty sardine-like. but it was really quite, and we also didn't know how we were going to get plowed out. We weren't really finding a lot of luck finding somebody who wanted to tackle a 4-kilometer logging road. But you know what was really amazing about that was that at the end of that 3 days, we were as cheerful and happy to be with each other as we were at the beginning. And you never could have told me, I am not a sociable person in that kind of way. You never could have told me I could do that. But there was something about just, we're all there for the same reason, you know. We're all there because we care, and we care more about it than we care about our immediate comfort. And I don't mean to make that sound holier than thou. We were actually quite comfortable in there, but we were there in a very simple way, and we had the same concern and the same desire to make a difference. And you never know whether you are going to or not. You can only take the action. But I think that element of community through care and community through being willing to take certain risks and being willing to endure certain things. I mean, goodness, people put themselves through incredibly hellish circumstances for sport and thrill. You know, it's not, but that sense of doing slightly extreme camping, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm glad you shared that, because that was one of the things that struck me when I was speaking to you at the camp. Was I know you've gone through some pretty difficult camping situations there, and in the past, being arrested and other things. You're definitely putting yourself in more difficult situations, and but also that your sense of joyfulness that can come from working with others to work for a shared purpose and shared values. So I guess I wanted to ask both of you too. This is maybe what we almost started talking about before, but I think that sometimes the need for ecological forestry practices and land conservation is misunderstood and is seen as this issue of, the environment versus the economy, or like living trees versus jobs, these kinds of things. And I was wondering if you could say something about that, and maybe about some other misconceptions that people might have when trying to follow this issue.
Well, the department has staff that has wrote up policies and guidelines for biodiversity stewardship of land, but it seems hell-bent that our government is not willing to follow their own policies and guidelines. Like wild oak camp, basically, if you read in their guidelines for the deer alone, they require 10 hectares of spruce canopy cover. And there's not 10 hectares on that 24 hectares of spruce. So these deer that migrate through this and use this as a wildlife corridor are only one species, but I mean, a number of other animals, wildlife animals, end up having to use that because the seed trees are not there. So the squirrels, they have to go where there's some seed trees. So the next thing you know, the fur bearers that follow the squirrels, the martins, the fisher, they have to go with. So it's just mind-boggling to see a government that doesn't even want to follow their own guidelines and turn around and put 30-ton machines into those small wet areas at that time of year. It's just plain stupidity and greed of West War on their part for even applying to do it. I mean, if you went in there, there may be 3 tractor trailer loads. So you're looking, that's less than $12,000 worth of standing timber that they could actually cut off. That's merchantable wood. It's just mind-boggling why they would even want to do that. I mean, you can go from clean across from the number 10 highway to the Morse Road, and you'll only find maybe, very few of those quarters that are left. And so where's that put the wildlife? Where's that put it throws everything at a balance. I mean, it's just mind-boggling that, yeah, but greed is a powerful evil. You know, our forefathers and our native brothers never forced that. You know, they never took 30-ton machines into harvest. I mean, they respected that. They went in at certain times a year. They harvested what they need, and that was all used for locally, not shipped off to some other country that just benefited the larger national corporations and financial institutions. So it's high time that our people stand up and say, no more of this. This can't continue. If not, we're in a serious situation.
I'll kick in something there too. You know, this government, the forestry industry, environmentalists, the last government, all have accepted William Leahy's recommendations. And his chief major, read the executive summary, it's right at the beginning point, is we have to put ecosystem health first. In other words, we have to put protecting and restoring the health of the natural systems in Mi'kma'ki at the top of the list. And he's very explicit that this means we have to stop balancing economic needs against environmental needs. And he really spells it out that you aren't going to have an economy without a healthy environment. And my goodness, if nobody gets that right now, as we watch what climate crisis and nature loss is doing, so they've all signed on to this in theory. It's not rocket science. William Leahy, they've agreed this should be the overarching priority, and yet it never is when you read what comes out of the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, in part because it does seem like there is real corporate capture. That the interests of the mills who want high volume, low price wood have triumphed in Nova Scotia for over 100 years. Read Joan Baxter's The Mill and weep. It isn't the interests of the small contractors who work in the forest. It certainly isn't the interest of the small sawmills who've all gone under, just about. It is the interest of some of the bigger mills, like Freeman Lumber. But it's a mystery to me why actually the government kowtows as much as it does. And I do think it's partly jobs, but the jobs have declined in the last 20 years. Since 2000, the direct jobs in the forests have dropped from 1,000 to about 250. Some figures say 400, but those are national statistics. Those aren't, we invented them. You know, there are way, way, way more jobs in tourism. Tourism actually brings in more percentage of GDP than forestry and fishing together. Now, I'm not saying that the jobs in the forest don't matter. I think we actually do need a just transition to help people move out of that trap Randy was describing, where they end up leasing very expensive machines. They're tied to the payments. They can't make them. They get kind of messed around by the mills. And who ends up going bankrupt is the contractor who's buying the machine, and who benefits is the financial company that loans them that money, and the mills that go on buying lumber for cheap. So, you know, it's kind of an ugly picture. It's not an unfamiliar picture. It's one that we could address, and it's one that maybe is going to shift because of carbon credits. And you can have different views about them, and I do, but there are now some good news where if a carbon credit is sold, the legal restriction on that forest is it can't be cut for 100 years. So it may become, in fact, more profitable to keep forests standing than to cut them down. And I wish there were another reason that we were going to keep forests standing, but you know, change is coming. And that's the other thing to say, is change is coming. It's not, they can't keep doing what they're doing forever. The question at this point is, do they get to go on cutting at the same pace for another 5 years and get rid of everything that is an Acadian forest with mixed species and has any kind of age and volume of wood to it? Or do we stop now and keep what we have? So you look at a little forest like Glasgow, why are they even looking at that? Randy said 12,000, the maximum amount I've heard is 20,000. It's ridiculous. You know, its ecological value is much higher than that. And yet they're not really they're not addressing that. So one of the things that I think Last Hope is saying is, hey, you've said you're going to protect 20% of Nova Scotia by 2030, and you've actually made that law. It's in legislation. Let's start now, not after you've cut everything. So we need to decide what areas shouldn't be cut. And then we can talk about how you do ecological forestry on the rest, which is going to be a really good question because an awful lot of the rest has been clear cut. And we need to work out how do you work with all of that clear cut forest? Like that is going to be a forestry question. Mm-hmm. It's not that forestry is going to be gone, but it's going to change.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, maybe this will have to be the last question, but I would love to hear from both of you. Well, there's a few questions I would still love to ask you, but let me see. Maybe if you could choose which of these you'd like to answer, or answer them both if you want, but I'd love to hear from you sort of what is your ideal, because it really strikes me that you have this hope despite all the things that you just mentioned. Like there's obviously some hope here. And so what is your ideal vision for the kind of the forested lands of Nova Scotia? And the other question is, what are ideas or suggestions do you have for people wanting to take action in some way?
I guess my suggestion would be the government. They already committed to, why not, there's been 48 acres there that adjoin the Last Hope camp that's been offered up to be declared a protected wilderness area. Why don't we declare a part of that and part of the land that adjoins that white ground as a protected wilderness area? If we want to have a balance, you can't just have a place that's desolate, for our nature and for our children to be able to visit those places and to see and feel the value in the ecological part of our forest. I guess that would be the best solution I could ask for.
And I guess I'm irrepressibly optimistic, I suppose. Part of me thinks paradigm shifts happen really quickly. We might have run the course with treating nature as something to be extracted, owned, despoiled, ignored, destroyed, really. And wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we actually did manage a collective shift to say, no, let's start working with the version that Indigenous peoples have always known. Let's act as if we are a part of nature, as if our health depends upon nature, as if the planet's health depends on nature. And here in this province, we have a way to do that. I mean, it's already there. It's already in the law. Let's set aside 20% of the province, lands and waters, right now. Start working on that and use that as a base for going further. But how would we do that? Well, one place to start would be, in 1958, quarter of the forests in Nova Scotia were over 80 years old. Now that's down to between 1% and 5%. So all the forests that are on public land, that are, that include trees that are over 80, let's put them into consideration for protection. When you do that, it's administered through the Department of Environment. There's a freeze on all harvesting, development, and road building. Let's get it moving. And I would love to see people throughout the province step up and start asking for that. And in fact, we've written a letter that we're asking people to send out, to send to the Premier, and not just themselves, but find other people. It's a very gentle letter in some ways. Some people have told me it's too soft, but I don't know that being hard is always the thing that works, you know. What we need is a lot of people to say, hey, this has really caused me a lot of grief, watching what's happened to our forests. And you've given us a way to start moving in the right direction. And we want you to do it. And we want you to do it right now, not after things have been cut. And as a token of your sincerity, we want you to stop the cut at the Last Hope Forest. But don't stop there. You know, start protecting more and involve the rest of us in it. Give us a voice, because we need to express the care we have. And we need a government that responds. And we could have that. You know, we could have that. It's not outside the realm of possibility. There are parts of this society that wouldn't perhaps like it, but I think there's way more of the society that would like it. So I guess that's my dream, and that's a piece of action to take, is to write that letter. And if you can, otherwise, you know, connect with the camp, come and visit us. I think of us as being a base for hope. You know, it might be a last hope, but it's still a hope. And the hope is if we work together and if we express that care for each other and for nature. It's not either or, it's both.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. On behalf of fellow humans and other creatures who share these lands, I want to give a real heartfelt thanks to both of you for all that you're doing and the sacrifices that you're making for the common good. And Anina, you mentioned that letter, and I have seen that you shared a template. And so for folks who are interested and maybe want to take a look at a template letter, we could email that to you. And I also just wanted to, so you also mentioned that folks could get in touch with Last Hope Camp if they want to support in any way. And also if you just want, or it shouldn't say just, if you want to hear the email updates from the camp and related issues, if you send an email, you will get all that information. And also you could email, if you emailed, you could ask for that template letter as well. And so I'll just put those links in the chat before we carry on with the next part here. So there's the email if you want to be on the Last Hope Camp list. And also there's a lichen workshop coming up, an identification that's, we didn't even talk about all the species at risk there that have been found in that area, but fairly recently. And only since that you folks have been protecting the camp, otherwise they never even would have been found, but there were some at-risk lichens found there. So there's going to be a workshop at the camp coming up. So I will also put that in the chat box if anyone's interested in sharing or maybe Susan will. One of us will put those links in there. Yeah, okay. So I guess now we will, I'd like to invite everyone to meet with two other people again and reflect upon what you've heard